but it's okay. Anyway, good to meet everyone. My name is Ange. I'm one of the Section 3 managers at Fraser's. Also one of the interview tutors as well. Also a medical student. It's safe. Okay, I will believe you. Also a medical student at Monash. I'm in my third year of postgrad med. So essentially this presentation that I have, the slide set that I have, is pretty brief, because I think this question is something that's quite personal. And should you be thinking about the MMI or resitting the GAMSAT? It depends on a range of different factors and reasoning and whatnot, and how you feel about the recent GAMSAT. So could I, this format was designed for a purpose, mainly so that it's easier for you to ask questions if you have any, also just to make it easier to interact as well. Could I get a show of hands or like something in the chat to indicate if you've sat the most recent GAMSAT? Cool. One sec. Awesome. Okay, so we've got some people. All right, cool, awesome. So I'm going to say roughly about like half of us have sat the most recent one, half to 60% have sat the most recent one, which is a majority. Look, if you haven't sat the most recent one, that's fine. Obviously, you're thinking about sitting it again. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So that's fine. I think the first thing, we'll get started about, my personal thoughts, but I think the majority of this is just going to be run by you. So if you have questions that you need answered, that's basically the reason for this sort of public, format, to have everyone here. So there's no real sort of Q&A part of it. If you have questions, chuck it in the chat. If you have questions, raise your hand, speak up. Pretty happy to answer most questions. So we'll get started with the slide deck. I'll finish pretty briefly, so a pretty short slide deck, and then it's just going to be focused on whatever questions you have. So does that sound good? Can you hear me okay before we get started? Or is there anything in particular that you want me to cover that we can? Then we can definitely do that as well. Someone's drawing, that's exciting. Nothing in the chat, so I'm going to move on. And if you have anything that you'd like me to cover, just again communicate in some way, shape or form. Awesome. Okay, so I think again, I said that this question is something that's quite personal. Whether you should resit the GAMSAT should ultimately depend on how you feel after the most recent GAMSAT you sat, whether that's in March or a couple of months previous. Now, it's hard to reflect on something that's a bit traumatic. All you get is the trauma. So I think reflection, it should, like, I think it should take you, like you should sit in a particular space and think about how well you've done across all three sections, how you, I think, felt during all three sections as well. Did you feel like endurance was pretty low when you hit section 3? Did you feel like your accuracy was pretty good? Did you feel like you were still answering most of the questions, or did it get lost in the panic and the timing of it all? These are just sort of some of the questions that I think, are or should be the basis of your reflection for how well you sat in the most recent GAMSAT. And therefore that sort of leads me on to this quote here, which is, I think, if you know yourself as to, how well you did and how well you think you went, I think I can't really answer that question for you. It's all about how you think you went. Now, after reflection, if you felt like, you gave it your best shot, you definitely feel like you've improved from your previous sittings. If you've sat any previously before the most recent one, then I think it's definitely important to just sort of give it a go and put that application in, and then start that journey there somewhere. I was telling someone recently, like when I put in my GEMSAS application not too long ago, so I think it'd be about 3 years ago now, I actually used, so I sat, the last GAMSAT I sat was my March turned May/April what's it called, online sitting. So that was the last one I sat. And we actually didn't get our results until the application process with GAMSAT actually finished. So I ended up taking a bit of a gamble and put in the GAMSAT ID of my most recent one, which was the online one, which was the first online one. And I didn't really know my score at all. So, I think the major questions that I used to reflect following that was, do I feel like I had some bit of an improvement, either in the way that I approached the questions, or did I find it easy enough to get down to 50-50, answer something? Did I find it easy to stick to the topic in section 2? Did I find it easy to finish 2 essays? Do I think I'll get a reasonable enough mark to sort of, scrape in within the basket of most universities, which we'll talk about a bit later on as well. I think these were some of the questions that I was thinking about. And I think I decided personally for me that it was worth a gamble to just put down the GAMSAT ID of the most recent test, even though I didn't have my score, mainly because I knew how I was tracking across all the tests and how I'd fare with the interviews and whatnot. So I think knowing yourself and taking some time off for reflection is probably the antidote to this question, I think. So that's me, smiling. So in terms of who I am, so there's some credibility to whatever I run for the next 40 minutes. Essentially, this is me in a nutshell in terms of my academic profile. I'm currently in 3rd year postgrad med, Monash. And before we get the age-old question of did you need to write the GAMSAT for Monash? So I didn't. So Monash doesn't need the GAMSAT. I was also fortunate enough to get an offer from Deakin as well. So went through the same GEMSAS process as everyone else. Decided to stick with the alma mater because I did my undergrad at Monash as well, and follow through. In terms of what I do with this company, so I am one of the 2 Section 3 managers, and also do some interview training here and there. This is probably, this picture sums up my personality. My personality is intensely and intimately tied with my dog. That's my dog with a ball that we stole from the local park. And I don't know what it is when it's dark and I take a photo and this is how it's something to do with the flash, and this is how, dog turns up. So that's just a bit about me. If you have any questions about anything I've said, again, you know how to communicate. So either unmute yourself or chuck it in the chat and I'll address that. So should I resit it? I've already talked about the majority of it. So reflection is key. I think when you're reflecting, you're thinking about a bunch of different things. So for instance, can I take on this? Yes, I can. So I think personally, it's important to compare to previous sittings as well. So compared to, let's say you sat the most recent one, let's say that's March, and then you're comparing it to 2 seasons ago, how do I feel regarding it? Do I feel like there is some sort of an improvement? Now, improvement come in a range of different forms. Like I think ease throughout the exam is one of them. But that's not really easy to figure out because every question that you're doing, you're going in there with a certain level of uncertainty and certain level of doubt. So it's not quite easy to understand whether you're getting the question right or wrong, because it's, again, all up to interpretation of the information, which can be different across different people as well. So I understand that that can be a difficult marker as well to use as a point of reflection. But I think other points of reflection is like, is my score good enough? I think that's the question, tying the first part of the question to the second, right? Like, should I resit the GAMSAT or should I go through with the rest of the journey? Well, is my score good enough to go through the rest of the journey? I think this is where the idea of like baskets come into play. So basically the idea of baskets is when you're applying to GEMSAS, like just chuck in the chat yes if you know the general process of GEMSAS, or if you'd like me to explain it alternatively. Explain, cool, all right, no worries. So this is to my knowledge. So GEMSAS is, yeah, okay, all good. So GEMSAS is this elusive portal that's used to apply to certain medical schools. Not all medical schools use GEMSAS. Examples of medical schools that don't use GEMSAS include University of Sydney, Bond, pretty sure Flinders doesn't use it as well. Monash doesn't use it. So these universities don't use GEMSAS as a portal to assess your competency to being a medical student or getting into medical school or dental school or whatever you're using this test for. GEMSAS, right, used for both medicine.
I'm sorry, can I just ask about
Yeah.
something you said?
Yeah.
I think before in one of the other Fraser's meetings, they said that Sydney and Flinders, they aren't within your preferences, GEMSAS, but you still apply through GEMSAS.
Okay.
So I'm not sure about that. So do I apply like from the university website or is it through?
Yeah. So from my knowledge, it's directly to them.
And do they open in May as well?
I think so. I think they should. They, like, if you go on their university website, like, they should have key dates. So go to Flinders MD, and then they should have key dates towards the bottom of the page, and then the key dates will tell you where and when to apply, because those universities have a portal of their own within their university. UQ is part of GEMSAS, so you can apply through GEMSAS, but the ones that I mentioned, as you said, Ali, is could have a portal of their own, so you apply through their website, from my knowledge. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, all good. Awesome. So essentially, as we were saying, so bar these other universities, there are majority of medical schools use GEMSAS as an assessment. So the way GEMSAS works is very elusive, as in it's shrouded in mystery. The best piece of information you can get is from the GEMSAS guide, which will be released sort of like every year pretty much. So if you go to the GEMSAS website, it should be there. Please have a read for medicine or dentistry. Essentially what it takes in is it takes in your GPA, takes in your GAMSAT score, essentially tries to weight it amongst the pool of applicants applying to your top preference university. So let's take an example. So my top preference was Deakin. My score, if I sort of put it in with the pool of average applicants applying to Deakin. Now, again, preferencing within GEMSAS is a whole new sort of topic and a whole new lecture in and of itself. But I think preferencing should essentially be consisting of two things, right? A, where you want to go, which state you want to be in, and also be within the average of, on their website, on most universities' websites, there'll be an average GAMSAT that was allowed an interview. On Deakin, it's very clear and it's very transparent, and it's on their website what the average GAMSAT was that allow people to get an interview. Okay, so go into these websites, research online what was the sort of average that you'd have for whatever university you hope to apply to. Think about whether your current score fits into that average plus or minus 2 points. If you feel like it fits into that average plus or minus 2 points, then the GAMSAT should be good enough to apply for that pool. Now, obviously, this is in tandem with your GPA. So your GPA, again, the GEMSAS guide and the university guide will be a little rough. So it'll just be like, 5 or 5.5 is your major sort of major sort of average, but it's not always the case. And even though you might be eligible to apply, it doesn't mean it'll be the one that gets you an interview. So the average is different from something we call the cutoff. So it's not a stupid question at all, because I used to get confused all the time. So cutoffs are essentially the minimum, right? Minimum that you're applying. After that, you're cut off from the eligibility, or you're cut off from the rest of the pool applying to interviews. Now, obviously, cutoffs might be different to the average. So let's say the average to Deakin that year was an average of 67, okay, which it actually was when I applied. When I applied, the average GAMSAT was 67 and the GPA was 6.8, yeah? So that was the average that I was dealing with. Now, I looked at my score, I looked at my GPA, it was higher than the average, okay? So I was like, okay, this is a school I want to go to, fits the first criteria. Secondly, it's good within the basket of applicants that have recently gotten an interview. So therefore, I'm a good candidate in this pool of people who want to study medicine at Deakin. Okay, so that's sort of how you assess where you put your preferences. So I hope that also clarified the difference between your cutoff and your average. They're sort of different things. Yeah, so I think like 65, again, depends, right? So it's not clear cut, it's not black and white, because different universities also have different sort of bonuses applied to these marks as well when you apply. So it's different. Plus or minus 2, use that as a gauge, and then use your GPA compared to previous years as a gauge to understand if your scores are good enough to apply for that current setting or current application process. Okay, so what GEMSAS does is it's according to the university's sort of values on emphasis on, what they place. So one university might value GAMSAT scores more than your GPA, but technically it's sort of equal, right? But different universities value different things. So depending on, you chuck in your GPA, you chuck in your GAMSAT, and GEMSAS calculates your GPA for you, okay? Now, don't ask me about GEMSAS GPAs. It's different for the different lengths of degrees you've done. It'll be a weighted GPA average, and the weighted will be calculated by GEMSAS. Now, if you email them and ask them, hey, what's my GPA? These are my scores. They are kind enough to get back to you with an answer for GPAs across the different universities. So if you feel like you want an update on where you're sitting, please email GEMSAS. They will get back to you. Yeah. So again, the schools and how they use GPA is different. Different schools use GPA differently, which is why email GEMSAS or look at GEMSAS guides and look within their look within their guide to see how GPA is calculated for each university. Okay, and honours does change your GPA a fair bit. So please email them or look at the guide to know where your GPA is. Yeah. Rough idea, what 2 years experience and bonus mark. That's all good. So that's all good if there's not enough information, and correct me or feel free to reply to whatever I say next if I'm not catching the question right. So 2 years experience, it depends where the experience is. It depends if it's affiliated with something that the school you're applying to is also affiliated with. So I know Deakin does a healthcare bonus. So if you've obviously worked in healthcare before, they add on bonus points to your application, and that eventually changes your ranking as well. So again, depends, but this information should be on the university's websites. It won't clearly be stated on the GEMSAS guide. It'll be on the university's websites for sure. Yeah. So essentially you chuck in your GPA, cool. Yeah, great. So yeah, it depends on the university. So you chuck in your GPA, GEMSAS, that goes into a pool, gets analyzed. And if the pool that you're entering for said university, if you're within the average plus or minus or above the average, then you get offered an interview. That's essentially how GEMSAS works. Now, let's say you attend the interview for your first preference. You attend the interview and, it doesn't go as hard as you would have liked. Then how GEMSAS works is it goes or uses your overall sort of weighting or number, right, ranking, combining your GPA, your GAMSAT, and your interview, and it uses that ranking that it has for the next preference. Yeah, sees, hey, is she good enough for her second preference within the pool of applicants that applied to the second university? Let's say, hey, that number is not good enough for the second. Then it goes to third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Yeah. That's how it goes. So the number of interviews you get is 1. You get your top preference or wherever, top preference or the highest preference within your list of universities that you apply for, unless you're an international student or you have also applied to other universities outside of GEMSAS, then you get multiple interviews. So for instance, if I applied to Monash and applied to Deakin through GEMSAS and I got an interview with both, then I'd have 2 interviews. So it depends where you apply. And it subsequently depends the offers you can get. Obviously, if you've applied to Flinders, Monash, and let's say Deakin, and you get into all 3, you have 3 offers, 3 interviews, yeah? So it depends. So anywho, going back, so, and then it just sort of follows on to the next preference, okay? So this is how GEMSAS works. So it works on the basis of ranking, okay? And therefore it would be extremely helpful in terms of, you know, answering the question of this webinar, which is, should you, you know, oh my God, I can't go back. Should you, you know, resit it, or, well, it's me. Should you resit it, or should you take the application process? Well, again, look at the guide, look at the universities, see if you fit well into the applicant pool with your sort of predicted GAMSAT, or how you feel like you went after those reflection questions. And then that will help you, again, knowing yourself and knowing how you've been going recently will help you in understanding whether it's good enough to start the process. Yeah. So I've talked for a fair bit. So I'll leave the floor open to any questions before we move on to this. So GEMSAS is exactly what I talked about. So question. So Annabelle's got a question. So I would say it's a combination of both. Yeah. So it depends on where you want to go through and where you're most likely to get in. So this is what I was talking about with regards to the like applicant pool. So within the previous sort of, you know, scores that SASA University website, SASA other resources, like different companies have different guides on sort of what the average and cutoff was, right? So look at that and then use that to understand where you want to go, but also, do I fit in within the pool of applicants that are most likely to apply this year as well? So if you feel like you fit in and is somewhere you want to go, put that as your top preference. Yeah, hope that answered that. So someone who's had this as their first sitting and is hoping to apply this year, would Fraser's mocks be an accurate gauge in terms of how you've done in previous sittings? Broadly, I'd say no, okay? Mainly because the Fraser's average and predicted mocks we get are essentially a reflection of how students have gone, who've sat mocks with us and then gone on to do well within their GAMSAT. So the predicted scores that you get are from our sort of cohort, and the general sort of information that we get every year with how everyone's gone, and the standard bell curve after every sort of exam marks and bell curve have been released. So, you know, use that as, I think, a good check-in point, but again, it's not the same as sort of, or same as in, it's not the cutthroat ASA way of going about things, or GEMSAS way of going about things. Yeah, it is pretty accurate within a 5-point range. Actually, it was pretty accurate within a 2-point range for me back when I sat the course and back when I did the mocks and did the actual GAMSAT as well. So it is pretty accurate. But again, I would say that, you know, trusting previous sittings would be a more useful gauge. But if these are the only mocks you've sat, that's fine as well. Would it be useful to put a university with a lower entrance? Again, if you don't want to go to this university and you put in a lower entrance score, then no. So it's got to be a combination of 2. Do you want to get in? Will you be good within the pool of applicants? Yeah, those 2 things. So yeah, international students, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, people, I think you apply through the website, like through the university website. I think the mode is different, but let me know if I'm wrong. No, absolutely not. It does not affect anything in a bad way. They're mutually exclusive, right? So like you apply this year, don't get in, that's fine. If you have different scores, you apply next year, might have a shot. Yeah. There used to be a saying back when I was going through this process that like it's not a matter of if you will get in, it's a matter of when. So again, different application cycles can have different scores and averages going in. So applying to one cycle doesn't blacklist you unless you've done something shady within interviews or anything like that. Doesn't blacklist you into the next one. Yeah, so they're mutually exclusive. There's no age cutoff. Go for it. One of my mates' roommate is 53 and is in second year of med at Deakin, so go for it, I would say. Yeah, go for it. Absolutely. No age cutoff at all. Cool. Nice. Okay. Any other questions about anything else? I reckon cutoff. 4-year rule. That's an interesting question. I think there might be like, again, there's different schools of thought on it. My personal thing is like more people might be sitting it, more people might be eligible as well. So I think scores you're definitely going to get a greater variation in scores. In terms of would it change the broader average that universities take, maybe by a slight 1 or 2 marks, I would think, but it wouldn't change it by a huge amount. And I think the cutoff should stay relatively the same. Note that the cutoff is different to the average. So the average might change 1 or 2 points, but I don't think that the cutoff should majorly change because of the 4-year rule. 4-year rule is basically like it's valid for 4 years now. So it's not just, year and a half, and then your GAMSAT sitting is no longer valid. So you can sit now and then your score will be valid for the next 4 years. Cool. Okay. Correlation between how you felt afterward and the GAMSAT score. Oh my God, this is I reckon this is a really good question just because I think I personally felt, so I sat it 3 times, first 2 times for the vibes, thirds prepped for. The one I prepped for, I felt decent about my section 3 score, or decent after my section 3, thought it went all right. Wasn't the best, came out guessing a bunch and I was like, oh my God, this isn't the best, but I feel like it's an improvement for the first and second. And I think that correlated pretty well with a good score. However, I know that most people feel nerve-wracked and you're not supposed to feel confident after this exam. It's not an exam, it's not a uni exam where you come out thinking, oh yeah, I knew all the answers because it was on the lecture slides. So I don't think so. I don't think there's a legitimate enough association. There might be a correlation. I don't think there's a legitimate enough association between how you're feeling after the GAMSAT and how you actually go. So don't trust those feelings too much. It's in a state of panic. But I think it's important to understand why the panic might have been there if you are feeling panicked after GAMSAT. If you're feeling panicked, did you finish all the questions? Did you have enough time? Was your strategy working? All those stuff, all those logistical things need to be considered. So yeah, I don't know if there's a correlation. It's probably a correlation, not an association in my opinion, but that's just me. Cool. Okay. Are the interviews held by the university that is your first preference? Yes, they are. Cool. How low is the cutoff from their average? Oh, I don't know, to be honest. There's no rule of thumb because this changes, right? Like that, because the average might change 1 or 2 points every year, up or down, right? The cutoff should still stay the same. So the difference between cutoff and average changes because the average changes ever so slightly. So typically it's like 4 or 5 points below like the average, I would say, is the major cutoff. That's my rule of thumb. There's no legitimacy in it. It's just sort of what I've seen from what I've seen. Yeah, Kyla, I don't think you'll ever feel great after a GAMSAT. I don't think I've ever felt great after a GAMSAT. So don't be too stressed out about how you're feeling immediately after. I've heard lots of things about Section 3 this year, mainly about how mathematically inclined it was. Was that a fair assessment? This is just from what I've heard from students as well. But cool, I'll let you guys chat about that. If we get interview but could not pass it, is it possible to get interview in the same university next year? Hang on, let me read that. If we get interview but could not pass it, is it possible to get interview in the same university next year, or does it impact? No, it doesn't. Mutually exclusive. If you have a better score and you're applying to the same university, again, think about the applicant pool, right? Whether you're on and off or like better or below the average pool of applicants. So they're mutually exclusive. They don't like remember your name and then they go, oh, nah, like not him again or anything like that. Like that's, they don't do that. Yeah, don't stress. That would be hell for people applying more than once or twice. So don't stress. Cool. If you interview at a uni but do not receive a course offer, are you eligible? If you interview at a uni but do not receive a course offer, oh no, I lost it. Are you eligible to interview again? Yes, you are, provided you meet the eligibility criteria for that university, or provided your scores and your scores are competitive enough the second time around. Cool. It's hardly any maths for you. Wow. Good for you. Yeah, damn. That's crazy. Yeah. Yeah, they do change it up. So the sittings are not the same. But must have been nice. Yeah, exactly. Must have been nice. Anywho, any last questions about GEMSAT and reflection about previous GAMSAT before?
I have a question about Sydney.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
think
Yep.
Sydney, there's something when you apply called the QAS. Like if you
Okay.
need a sort of academic transcript, I wanted to ask about that. So you don't just provide like the GAMSAT and the GPA. I think there's something else.
Okay. Personally not sure. Is this for domestic applicants?
Yes.
Interesting. I'll have a look. I'll hopefully have some information for you by the end before 8. But I will have a look. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Good. Cool. Okay, let me see. Any other questions? Oh, QAS. Okay, hang on. I'm just looking through it. It's a statement from what I'm reading. So QAS. Yeah, I'll have some more information for you by the end. Fortunately, not entirely sure about what it is. So it's qualifications assessment service. Oh, okay. So I think it's Ali, correct me if I'm wrong, or if you have any other information about it. But I think QAS is basically for assessing your GPA. So it's a service for assessing your GPA. So it says here that you're essentially required to have your qualifications, so your undergrad degree essentially assessed, right? Or your GPA assessed through the qualifications assessment service. So it's a service more so than anything. It's just GPA, QAS, GPA. Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, good. Okay, cool. Advice with regards to CASPER. Oh, yes, I remember I did sit CASPER. So CASPER is for people who have not heard of it. So my last 3 schools were all the portfolio, back when portfolios were a thing. They were UND, UNDF, and Wollongong. So I did sit the CASPER exam. So CASPER exam is interesting. I think first tip is to get better at typing. If it's still a typing based exam, it majorly depends on how fast you type and also what you type. Prepping for MMIs, prepping for CASPER will be similar things. So CASPER is essentially sort of like a situational judgment exam where you get presented with different scenarios and you type out your answer to how you would respond in that scenario. It doesn't always have to be scenarios, but that's sort of the majority of the questions. The major advice I would give, sit the mocks that they have on the website. Yeah, I think that sort of sufficed for me. And I think it'd be good for anyone before sitting the actual one to sit the ones on the actual website. They have some mock ones and they're really good. And the format is exactly the same as the actual one you get. So yeah, awesome. Okay. Cool. Oh, video response. Oh, that's so good. I had to get better at typing just to get better at my CASPER. So that's great. Okay, what advice would you give someone who's gone through all the practice and kind of remember the answers? Is this for MMI or GAMSAT? I don't know. So yeah, if you could reply to that, I will have a look again. Universities portfolio based or more CASPER based compared to non-CASPER ones. The CASPER one is the same one used for like the teacher course or the education course. What am I saying? The education courses. Yeah, so it's good. I think it's a good way of assessing how, situationally you're replying to most things. I think it's a better way of judging that than your qualifications for a portfolio. So yeah, best way to practice through that is through their actual website. Can you sit it more than once? I'm pretty sure you can only sit it once. Correct me if I'm wrong again. Oh, Ashley, thank you. Yep, cool. So only once per application cycle. Great. So with regards to which website for the CASPER ones, the actual CASPER website, like search up CASPER mocks, like it comes up, go to the actual website. So in terms of going back to the question, universities, CASPER / that based versus not, really go to their website and try and understand their mission, their values, and their ethos. You want to be aligning yourself with that. Universities that tend to, value more of that situational / portfolio-ness tend to value if you more closely align with their values or not, right? Because they're more invested in sort of training you through for how many ever years you're going to be there. So 4 years. So they're more interested in how you will benefit their community and align with their community. So have a look at their values, see if you align, try and make yourself align through many of the responses you give. So for example, if a university has pastoral care, you find that to be very wholesome, you find that to be useful, state that. Yeah, so it's all a matter of how well you've researched what you actually want to get into. It sounds sort of basic and obvious, but research where you want to go into, and see if you align with them and how you can make yourself more aligned. Okay, so that's a major sort of thing I'd say for that. In terms of remembering GAMSAT answers, so even if you remember, it doesn't really matter what the answer is, to be honest, when you're practicing for GAMSAT. It just matters why the answer is the answer. So I think even if you remember how you got to the answer, try and disprove the other options. Yeah, so that's probably what I'd say. I don't know if you've gone through everything. I'm sure there's questions lying around that are unattempted. But if you're thinking about resitting it, put the emphasis on mocks, put the emphasis on timing your questions, put the emphasis on strategy and approach, and then ask yourself, if you remember it, there's no point in just picking it because you remember it, because and you have a reasoning for picking the answer. So go through the other answer options and see, or try and prove to yourself why they are not correct. So don't think CASPER's for Deacon. I'm not sure. Unsure. Do I need to study for Casper. I think it's good as a Zoom user to study for anything within this process. It's good to be prepared. I think going in Casper, it's really good to have a structure to most of your responses. If you just go in there and you're like, let me just type it out as quick as possible, things may be incoherent. So it's good to have a practice on their website. We don't have a prep course. We do have a mock exam for Casper. So if you're interested in it, reach out to admin. Do all the unis have similar interview styles? Would some be harder than others? Just wondering if that should be considered when ordering preferences. No, absolutely. So there's no one harder than the other. All of them test the same skill, which is communication, empathy, compassion, problem solving, reasoning, teamwork, leadership, all of that jazz that's already within their website. So you'll find that different universities value different things, and therefore the questions comprising of their interview will consist of different things. So for instance, Deacon's recently come out with a rural sort of emphasis. So I would expect, some of the questions to be surrounding that. Like you want to research their university. If they place an emphasis on something, you would think the questions are likely to be on that. So I don't think, however, it should be a basis for preferencing. Interviews are going to be nerve-wracking regardless of where you sit it. So yeah, just keep that at the back of your mind. Cool. Scoring for Casper, no idea. Yeah, no clue, sorry. I don't think Casper is a replacement. It's an additional thing. How would prep for panel interview? Yeah, that's good. So different from that of an MMI. So it differs a lot, mainly because the structure is different. Give me one sec. So I'll just answer the other question because it's a bit easier to do. MMI stands for multiple mini interviews. Okay, so I'll just go through the MMI process in the next slide. This is the admin email. Okay, cool. So MMI is multiple mini interviews. This is different from a panel interview. Panel interview, yes, I can explain. I'll try to explain Casper. But if you search up Casper exam, it should tell you what it's assessing, but we'll go through it after. What was I saying? MMI. So MMI is short for multiple mini interviews. Essentially, it's a process whereby you have 7 to 8 stations. Okay, so we call them stations, 7 to 8 stations or mini interviews that you have to round through, right, in an interview process. Okay, and that is your medical interview. Okay, so your obviously, let's say station 1 is about leadership. So the question or the prompt that you see when you enter that station might be, describe a time where you exhibited leadership qualities. Okay, so you describe the time. Now, every station or every prompt can be followed up with follow-up questions. So typically, depending on the timing of the interview or timing per station, you have different number of follow-ups. So you can have 3 follow-ups, you can have 4, you can have 2, you can have none at all. Yeah. So they might say, describe time where you exhibited leadership, yada, yada, yada. You say it. Second question might be, why do you think leadership is important in healthcare? Cool. Second. Third question might be, how do you see leadership? Imagine you're a rural GP, like how would you exhibit leadership? That would be a third one. So that would also bring in your knowledge of public health and rural health as well. So those are 3 simple questions that are about 1 station on leadership. So obviously you have 7 to 8 of these, or depending on how many every university does, and you sort of circle through them, right, in one go. Yeah. So that's a multiple mini interview. This is different from a panel interview, whereby it might go for 45 minutes to 50 minutes straight. So you're not jumping in between any stations. Okay. But they are asking you different questions, but you're not jumping in between any stations. Okay. You're staying in one place. You have in front of you 4 or 5 people, and they're essentially answering or asking questions, and you're answering through them. Okay. It's a lot more intimate compared to an MMI, because you have the same people you're staring down the barrel of. But yeah, they're different in structures. So therefore your answers should reflect the differences. So in a multiple mini interview, you're very exact and specific to the prompt itself. However, in a panel interview, you're also asked to reflect on your experiences and your qualifications as well. So therefore, in your response, it shouldn't just be about the question. It should also hope to incorporate university values as well as your qualifications and experiences as well. Okay, so that's the major sort of difference between them, and therefore what the difference means. Casper, so Casper is essentially a test. It is a test based on situational judgment. So they give you certain prompts. These might be video prompts, these might be quotes, etc., and they ask you questions about it. It's essentially an MMI that you type out. Yeah, or in the previous, I think someone mentioned there might be a video response to a prompt as well. Yeah, so that's Casper. It's usually used, it's a situational judgment test that's more interactive, and it's usually used for education sort of purpose, education courses. But we're seeing sort of medical schools adopt that as well because it's a good judgment of situational thinking. Are there hurdle scores? There's no, I don't know. It depends on the rubric that each university has. However, if you feel like, you're going in there not really hitting the mark with what the question is asking you, and you're just sort of aimlessly providing information, obviously that would be a low score for that station. Okay. So yeah, I hope that answered that. So, so I think UND is using Casper from memory. Correct me, anyone. I'm reaching out to the 45 people here. 44, please let me know if Casper is using any others. UND from memory. Cool, awesome. No dramas. So interviews, just the process of interviews. So interviews are, let's say you've chucked in your GPA, you've chucked in your GAMSAT, you're good within the pool of applicants to that medical school, then you get invited for an interview. The interview might be of two formats, the panel interview or the MMI interview. The MMI is what I talked about previously. So you have multiple stations and you're going in between them and they might be testing you on different skills. The panel, however, you're in front of 4 to 5 people. These might be members of the University Academic Medical Academic Council, and essentially answer a bunch of questions for a set amount of time. Following that, your interview score, you get a numerical score that they might assess using rubrics. And you essentially combine your rubric score, you combine your GAMSAT, you combine your GPA, or to get any other test or any other application component, you combine them all together, have a weighting, use that weighting compared to the rest of people within that pool, applicant pool for that university, see where you sit. If you sit pretty high, you get an offer. That's pretty much how the entire, very simplified version of how the entire process is. It's all based on ranking across all 3, Wollongong as well. Cool, awesome. Do the GEMSAS unis only need GEMSAS and GPA? I'm guessing it was GAMSAT. So in my humble knowledge, yes, might require different things depending on whatever university you're applying for, if they require anything previous to the application cycle. But in my opinion, or from what I've gone through, yes. Cool. I think for MMI, I've explained what it is. I've explained interviews. The major thing is preparation is key. Don't think that, oh yeah, I've sat interviews before, it'll be right, I'll just go and wing it. Never goes well. So please, it is something you can prep for. You'll be surprised how differently you think and differently you speak when you're put under time pressure. So practice with people, anyone, everyone, if you're thinking about sitting the MMI. So in short, again, I know it's a personal one, it's a personal question. So I think know yourself. If you sit within the applicant pool, you're good with the averages and cutoffs, then apply, practice your MMI, communicate and get in. So we've been going through questions pretty much throughout everything. I'm opening the floor now to pretty much anyone and everyone. So if you have any questions, feel free to to jump in. Watch out in the chat. There's nothing else formal in terms of what I have to say. That's pretty much the end of this. We're 5 minutes early. But yeah, if there's any questions, I'll stick around. Thanks, guys. And if you want to reach out, like I'll put my email, and I'm pretty sure I've given admin's email as well. I don't know why I can't type, but I will. I'll try and put my email in there. Okay, cool. Questions. Okay, so I'll stop the recording as well. So